Have you ever looked out at the vast, shimmering ocean and wondered what secrets it holds? We often gaze up at the stars, searching for the origins of life. But what if the greatest origin story of all happened right here, in the deep blue waters of our own planet? Today, we're diving deep, way back in time, to explore one of the most profound questions ever asked. How did life begin in the oceans? Picture Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. It's a hostile, alien world. Volcanoes are erupting everywhere. The atmosphere is a toxic mix of gases with barely any oxygen, and meteorites are constantly bombarding the surface. It's not exactly a welcoming place. But amidst this chaos, something incredible was happening. As the planet slowly cooled, water vapor in the atmosphere condensed and fell as rain, torrential, planet-drenching rain that lasted for millions of years. This rain filled the basins and craters, forming the primordial oceans. These early oceans were not the clear, blue waters we know today. They were a murky, chemical soup, often called the primordial soup. Think of it as a planet-sized chemistry experiment. The water was filled with dissolved minerals from the rocks, along with simple organic compounds delivered by comets and meteorites, or formed by lightning strikes in the atmosphere. We're talking about molecules like amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA and RNA. All the basic ingredients for life were floating around, but they were just that, ingredients. They needed a spark, a place to come together and organize. This is where things get really fascinating, and scientists have a few leading theories. One of the most popular is the hydrothermal vent hypothesis. Deep on the ocean floor, there are these cracks in the Earth's crust called hydrothermal vents. They're like underwater geysers, spewing out superheated, mineral-rich water from deep within the planet. These vents create a unique environment. There's a steep temperature gradient, from scorching hot near the vent to cold in the surrounding seawater. And there's a rich chemical gradient, full of compounds like hydrogen sulfide and iron. Scientists believe these vents could have acted as natural chemical reactors. The porous, honeycombed structures of the rock around these vents could have trapped the simple organic molecules from the primordial soup. Within these tiny, protected pockets, the energy and chemical gradients provided by the vent could have driven the reactions needed to link these simple molecules into more complex chains, like proteins and nucleic acids. It's like these vents were tiny, natural laboratories, concentrating the building blocks of life and providing the energy to assemble them. Imagine, deep in the crushing dark of the ancient ocean, the very first complex polymers of life were being forged in the heart of these underwater volcanoes. Now, having complex molecules is one thing, but it's not life. A key step is creating a boundary, something to separate the inside of a cell from the outside world. This is where lipids come in. Lipids are fatty molecules that don't mix well with water. When you put them in water, they naturally arrange themselves into spheres, forming a little bubble called a vesicle. This creates a simple membrane. In the primordial soup, these lipid bubbles could have accidentally trapped some of those newly formed proteins and nucleic acids inside. And just like that, you have a protocell, a tiny, self-contained package of life's essential chemistry, the earliest ancestor of a living cell. But which came first, the instructions or the machinery? The DNA or the proteins? This is a classic chicken and egg problem in origin of life research. DNA holds the genetic blueprint, but it needs proteins to replicate. Proteins do all the work in a cell, but they need DNA to tell them how to be built. For a long time, this was a major puzzle. The answer might lie with a different molecule, RNA. Today, RNA is mostly known as the messenger that carries instructions from DNA to the protein building machinery. But scientists have discovered that some RNA molecules, called ribozymes, can also act like enzymes. They can catalyze chemical reactions, including making copies of themselves. This leads to the RNA world hypothesis. The idea is that the earliest forms of life were based not on DNA, but on RNA. These early RNA molecules could both store genetic information and carry out the chemical reactions needed for life. They could self-replicate, evolve, and compete. It was a simpler, more primitive form of life, a world dominated by RNA. Over millions of years, this RNA world could have gradually evolved. DNA, being more stable, eventually took over the job of storing information, and proteins, being more versatile, took over most of the catalytic work. RNA was left as the intermediary, the role it mostly plays today. So we have these protocells, powered by chemistry from hydrothermal vents, with self-replicating RNA inside. This is the dawn of life. The first living things were likely single-celled organisms called prokaryotes, similar to the bacteria and archaea we know today. They were incredibly simple, with no nucleus or complex internal structures. They just floated in the nutrient-rich ocean, absorbing chemicals, replicating, and evolving. For about 2 billion years, this was it. Life existed, but it was all microscopic, all in the sea. But then, one of these tiny organisms had a revolutionary idea. It developed a new way to get energy: photosynthesis. By using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, these organisms, known as cyanobacteria, could produce their own food. And as a byproduct of this process, they released something that would change the world forever: oxygen. At first, this oxygen was absorbed by the iron dissolved in the oceans, which literally caused the seas to rust, leaving behind massive deposits of iron ore that we mine today. But eventually, the oceans became saturated, and oxygen began to bubble out into the atmosphere. This is known as the Great Oxidation Event. For the early life forms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, this was a catastrophe. Oxygen was a toxic poison. But for life as a whole, it was the greatest opportunity in history. The presence of oxygen in the atmosphere allowed for the evolution of a much more efficient way to get energy: respiration. It also led to the formation of the ozone layer, which shields the planet from harmful ultraviolet radiation. This made the surface of the planet and shallower waters much safer for life. This new oxygen-rich environment set the stage for the next great leap: the evolution of complex cells, or eukaryotes. These are the types of cells that make up all animals, plants, fungi, and protists, including us. Eukaryotic cells are much larger and more complex, with a nucleus to house their DNA, and specialized compartments called organelles to carry out different functions. It's thought that these cells arose through a process called endosymbiosis, where one simple cell engulfed another, and instead of digesting it, they formed a partnership. The little cell inside, which eventually became the mitochondrion, was great at using oxygen to produce energy, and it shared that energy with its host. With complex cells now in the picture, the pace of evolution quickened. About 540 million years ago, something incredible happened: the Cambrian explosion. Over a relatively short period, geologically speaking, there was a dramatic burst of diversification. The oceans, which had been home to mostly simple, soft-bodied organisms, suddenly filled with an astonishing variety of complex animal life. Creatures with shells, skeletons, legs, and eyes appeared. Ancestors of almost all modern animal groups emerged in the sea during this period. From these oceanic beginnings, life eventually made its way onto land. But the ocean remains its cradle. Every time you stand by the shore, you're looking at the place where it all began. From a chemical soup in a violent, young world, to tiny self-replicating molecules in the dark of a hydrothermal vent, to the first cells breathing life into the atmosphere, the story of our origins is written in water. It's a story of chance, chemistry, and billions of years of relentless evolution. And it reminds us that the most profound mysteries are sometimes hidden not in the distant stars, but in the deep blue heart of our own planet. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back to the beginning. It's a truly mind-bending topic, and we're learning more every day. If you found this as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest questions in science. Let me know in the comments which origin story you find most compelling. See you in the next video.